it's a weird thing to say, but the heart failure in its totality has not been a negative thing in my life,
Right.
really, because it's given me the life that I've had, and I wouldn't change any of it.
Hello, welcome to Life by Misadventure. I'm your host, David, and today I have an amazing conversation coming with a friend of mine, Alan King.
Hello.
And Alan and I and Ben, who's our producer today, we run a podcast together where we talk about AI. So we all co-host the podcast. And the reason that this topic came up is because we were just having a call. I don't even remember what we were talking about, but just in passing, Alan made a comment and he said, "Oh yeah, I was too busy dying." And Ben and I just kind of thought, oh, it's, just being English and whatever, kind of being a bit funny. And we didn't really think too much about it and just let it pass. And then we got on a conversation a week or two later and it came up again. And I think one of us said something about it. And then Alan was like, no, I'm serious. Like, I actually died. And we were like, wait, what? And he's like, oh yeah, you don't know. I have this condition and this has happened. This is like the third time it's happened. And I thought that was absolutely incredible. And I'm like, I really need to talk to you about this because I want to understand not only what happened, but how does that change how you feel about yourself and your family and everything else. So that's who we have here today. So Alan, thank you for coming on and talking about this with us.
Well, pleasure to be here, Dave. Yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. So just before we talk about the first time it happened, what was your life like? And what were you doing? Were you active? Like what was going on in your life at the time?
I mean, it's a long time ago. So I was 37, which
Okay.
is 2007. So
Right. Okay.
that's, as I say, that's a long time ago. And probably in the year leading up to it, I'd been feeling pretty unwell, actually, on and off. I'd been to a friend's stag actually in Spain, and we'd had a few beers, or more than a few beers, and had a pretty late night, right through to the early hours of the next morning, as you would do on a stag. And the guys were going to carry on. That was a Friday night. They were going to carry on the Saturday. And I remember saying to them, like, I'm going to have to go back to the hotel. I feel really unwell, and and of course everyone assumes it's the alcohol, right?
Yeah.
And so I go and lay in the hotel, and I'm there till the Sunday morning, till they leave. I'm literally unable to get. And I remember laying in the hotel bed that night, and just the room sort of spinning and almost kind of like a sort of surreal acid trip or something. It was like I was just kind
Right.
of
Okay.
drifting in and out of consciousness. And I remember them coming back at one point and then going again, but not really being able to communicate to them, almost like in a kind of semi-comatose feeling. Anyway, so that was that. I did somehow manage to get myself to the airport with their help, and then on a plane home. And that was probably about 3 months before I sort of had full
Right.
heart failure.
Okay.
In the then months leading up to that, I was in and out of the doctors. I sort of went a few times and said, look, I'm really don't feel great. And they do an ECG and kind of go, yeah, no, you seem all right.
It looks fine.
You're 37. What's the problem? And I was sort of saying, yeah, but I really feel like not well. But that was it. That was as far as they would go with it.
So what was the feeling that you were feeling?
So just like all the blood was draining out of me, like just short of breath, just like things were the walls were kind of closing in or something.
Wow.
The
Okay.
vision felt like it would shut down, and I'd have palpitations and just feel very sort of sweaty and unwell, basically, and dizzy, very dizzy. A bit. If you stand up very quickly, you
Yeah.
kind of go, "Ooh." Well, imagine that on sort of steroids, and the GPs were sort of having none of it at the time. You're going, "No, you're 37, you're absolutely fine." And there had been a few incidences, I suppose, on my record, my health record back when I was a student, where I'd had panic attacks, and of course now on reflection, were they? I don't know. Probably not. It was probably an early manifestation of this, but not as severe. But so this went on, and on the very day that I finally did have the heart failure happen, I was actually on an advanced driving course.
Right.
Which was interesting because I'm sort of driving this car, and I've got this guy next to me in the car, sort of giving me instructions, and it's like a kind of weird dream almost, that I'm in. And we stopped at one point to have some lunch somewhere. We were driving around kind of, Buckinghamshire somewhere, which is where I was living at the time, doing, this was just an advanced driving course for work and stuff, And yeah, I really kind of struggled to get through that day. It was hard, I felt weird, strange, and unwell a lot of the time, but I didn't want to sort of say anything to the guy. Do you know what I mean? Well, I probably should have done in hindsight. If I'd known what was happening, I definitely would have done.
Yeah.
So I got home, and it was probably 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Again, didn't really feel very well at all, and thought, I'm gonna have to go to bed. I've obviously drunk too much coffee or something, or there's something affecting me that's not right. So I literally just took myself off up to bed.
Yep.
And I guess just blacked out, was gone for the night. And the next thing I know, I'm sort of waking up, and it's the morning, probably about 7:30, 8 o'clock, and I literally step out of bed and just collapse, just go down, and then I kind of wake up again 30 seconds later on the floor, and sort of try and make sense of what's happening, and just think to myself, I need to be in a hospital now, like not in 20 minutes, not in half an hour,
Yeah.
not I'm going to sit and wait for an ambulance. Like, I just have to be there right now.
Now. Yeah.
And
Were you alone?
well, so at the time, so my ex-wife was there, and I think I didn't even wait for them. I sort of looked at them, and I just said, I'm going to the hospital, and just literally, almost whatever I was wearing, just walked out of the house, got in the car, and where I lived was a place called Hazelmere, which is at the top of High Wycombe. So, literally went down the hill in the car, about
Right.
2 miles, just pulled straight into the hospital, right outside Casualty. Just got out the car, left it, just literally
Yeah.
parked outside the front door.
Yeah.
Threw the keys in the car, and just walked in. And I just walked into the hospital and just said, "I think I'm dying." And obviously, I don't know. They took one look at me and went, "Bring him through," and just took me
Yeah.
straight into the back,
Right.
wired me up, and I blacked out at that point. And then sort of, when I came around again, at which point, the family have arrived, and there are people there, and I'm wired up basically, and I'm well, what's happening, and at that point, they explained to me, you're in heart failure, you're out for a while, but now we've pumped you full of this drug, and
Right.
it's hopefully going to help try and get things under control. And I said, well, what's happening to my heart? And they were like, well, it's racing at 300 beats per minute.
Wow.
You've got we'll come to this later, but a thing called an ejection fraction, which is the amount of blood it pumps out.
Right.
And that's down to sort of 15, 20%. And
Wow.
normal would be 70 or
Yeah.
80%.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that's each time it beats how much it clears the chambers. And so essentially, the thing's just completely irregular, and just gone mad, basically. And whilst I was out, they'd done an echo, which is what the ladies get when they're pregnant,
Yeah.
to have a look at the baby, and they could immediately see that my left ventricle was just blown out, probably twice the size it should be
Wow.
at this
Okay.
point.
Yeah.
And so what's happened overnight, when you look back at that, then is, I've obviously come home from the driving thing. I'm in heart failure at that point. I don't realise that, obviously.
Yeah.
And instead of what I should have done at that point, obviously, is gone to the hospital. But I keep being told by the doctors that there's nothing wrong.
Yeah.
You'll be fine. You're 37.
Yeah.
So it's, I went to bed, and so essentially I was in heart failure all night. And then I got to the hospital. I continued to stay in heart failure at that extreme level for about another 36 hours. And the point at which they have this kind of shock to get regularity back into the heart.
Right.
Eventually, the drugs weren't kind of doing what they need to, and eventually the drugs do have an effect, and things start to sort of calm down. But that was about 36 hours, and probably the funniest anecdote of all of that was my brother. When a good friend of his, very sadly, his wife passed away many years ago, and he sent me a text message, basically, because I texted him and sort of said,
Right.
"This, by the way, this was pre-iPhones, right? This was
Right.
this
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
a Nokia."
I was gonna say, yeah, it's
Yeah,
probably,
I was
yeah.
playing Snake in between,
Yeah.
but sends a text message to me. I sent a text message saying, they've done the diagnosis is cardiomyopathy, dilated cardiomyopathy, and he sends me a text straight back saying, "Oh yeah, that's what Gareth's wife died of." I'm like, "This is the news.
Thanks.
This is the news I want right now." I was like, and so I texted him back saying, "Yes, I am still in heart failure."
Yeah.
You know? So
Thanks for that.
yeah, thanks for that. You've lifted my spirits, no end. So I was in hospital then for a while, and it was
So
very low. The heart, the ejection fraction was down to 25% really
right.
when I left hospital. So
So is that Is that what causes your heart to beat faster? Because it's like your body recognizes it's not pumping very much, so it starts pumping faster to try and is
Yeah,
that the
my
corrective
my my understanding, and I've
action?
obviously spent a lot of time understanding the condition, is
Yeah,
that there's a moment where, for whatever reason, the heart's just become so weak it just can't really function anymore. So it's just lost control, and then it's trying to go faster to try and compensate, but actually it's so weak and irregular,
right,
it's not really doing an awful lot. So it's like an overinflated balloon. It's just stretched out of its shape, and it's
right.
just flapping about basically like this, and it's trying
Okay.
to get the blood. But essentially, what's happening is there's not enough blood then getting into everything.
Yeah,
My brain, everything's shutting down because there's, and I think the reality is that if below a certain point, that's it. It's just lights out.
yeah,
And you black out, and then you just hope that someone's gonna find you and help you,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
get you back on track. But yeah,
That's pretty nuts. So I'm just gonna look to camera and just say, we're not doctors.
no, no,
So none of
absolutely,
this constitute anything we talk about is not medical advice. This is just Alan's story of what happened to him. Um, but okay, so that's pretty nuts. So that's sort of a couple of days that goes on, and
yeah,
then things start to calm down a little bit.
yeah.
And then what?
Well,
How
I mean,
how does your life like what happens in the next like week or so, and then
life's really different, I have to
mm,
say. I mean, it was sort of a real shock and awe moment for me because it was kind of like you're going along on one track. And then I think in life, it's the things that kind of hit you from the side, isn't it? That you don't expect. That suddenly just push you into another track. And then you have to kind of reevaluate everything. And what does this actually now mean? And how do I go forward from here? Because I'm now in an entirely new position, and that's not something that, I was expecting. And it wasn't, certainly wasn't part of the plan. Um, so you go through a whole process of thinking what's actually possible for me now, what's capable, how much pressure can I put myself under in the future, what does this mean, how long am I going to live,
mm,
and so all your priorities start to shift. And at that point in time, the prognosis then wasn't great. I mean, it's got better over time because the new drugs have come along. But at the time, there was a new drug out called Ramipril, which was quite new. It'd been around for about 4 or 5 years at that point. And at the time, with the level of severity of my heart failure, which was at the very severe end. I mean, they basically said to me, "We can't believe you made it through the night. Basically, that you're actually
right,
alive. You shouldn't be with us on paper. Like you
right,
shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be talking to you." Um, was about 5 years. That was with medication. It was probably, well, with a heart that bad,
right.
probably 5 years you'll be doing quite well.
Okay,
And statistically speaking, but they did say at the time, but this Ramipril drug's come out a couple of years ago, and we don't quite know how well that's going to work yet and what the longer term benefits of that are going to be. And as it turned out, very good. And it's been, it's probably the thing that has kept me alive, in those. And now I'm not even on Ramapril anymore because it's moved on again
right.
since, right? There's
Yeah,
new
yeah,
drugs, but back then, which is 20 years ago, it's amazing to think now. That probably was the thing. If it had happened 5 years, if it happened when I was 30, I'd have probably been done. Because there was no ramp. It would have been a very
right.
different outcome. So I'm always minded of my grandfather who died of TB shortly before the cure for TB was kind of rolled out. It's just
Right.
timing, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Bad timing. And I think for me, I got quite lucky, really, in that sense. But the first year was tough because it took a long time to get any kind of recovery. When I came to hospital, I had this sort of 20-25% function, which means in reality, walking up a normal house stairs here or
mm,
whatever, just a normal
yeah,
flight of stairs, I'd have to stop halfway up and basically sit down. Or, I would go out in the street for a walk and an old lady would be overtaking me,
yeah.
a 90-year-old. And in fact, the heart guy did say to me at some point, he said, look, you've got to remember, you've basically got the heart of a 90-year-old now. You might have a 37-year-old's body, but that's not what's going on with your
Inside.
heart,
Yeah,
you know. And he said, and that's really never going to change because this is a condition where there's no medical procedure for it. You can't go and have something fitted or a stem or a pump, or there's no thing. You've just got this heart muscle that's fundamentally now weak because the left ventricle's been stretched out beyond its capability and what it should be like. So it's thin, it's weak, and it's
yeah.
never going to get stronger. So,
Do they know why that happens?
well, it can happen for many different reasons, I think. It can be genetic, is the first thing to say. It can be down to lifestyle, too much booze, too many cigarettes. I mean, I certainly had my fair share of booze and cigarettes, but then, no more than say my entire social group, they were all
Yeah.
drinking the same and smoking the same, right?
Yeah.
So, and they don't have this condition. So I think I probably wasn't at the extreme end of that in that sense. So it's probably more likely in my case to be genetic,
Right.
or you could be hit by a virus at some point,
Okay.
which really attacks your heart muscle, and you wouldn't know.
Right.
Right, so like
Okay.
you just think
Yeah.
you've got
Yeah.
a cold, right? But actually, what it's really doing is the cold is almost like a cover, and it's actually just attacking your heart muscle and causing you a
Okay.
lot of problems.
That's
So
nuts.
it could be a virus, it could be a combination of all three. It could have been that I got a virus at university, let's say. I mean, I had glandular fever in my teenage years, and I was swimming, and at that point, I was swimming and putting my body under a lot of strain from swimming as well. So you think virus combination, then some drinking through university,
Yeah.
who knows, right? Then, and they've never been able to pin it down for me. And some people with this condition, they have been able to sort of clearly say, yeah, that was the cause.
Right.
But in my instance, they're not sure.
Can't
They,
really
they
work it
can't
out.
quite pin it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know. So
And so so that happens.
yeah,
You sort of get your diagnosis. At least you have an idea now. You know what that is. And then, is there any way? Can you like work to make it stronger, or does it? There's like nothing you can do really.
you
I mean,
can
because
wait.
you seem to get around okay now,
Yeah,
and I assume, and we've got a lot of story to go in between then and now, obviously. But is it the drugs that really that are helping, or was there something you were able to go, okay, I need to go in and I need to walk, X amount every day, and that will build the strength up
yeah.
again.
So the frustrating part about the condition is exercise doesn't really help it. If anything, it causes the problem.
Right.
So, and we'll come to that later when the second and third events,
Yeah.
because really
Yeah.
a couple of those were kind of self-inflicted to some degree. But essentially, yeah, no, doing more exercise or trying to, it's not like a muscle that you're trying to build up strength.
Yeah.
Like if I work
Yeah.
harder,
Yeah.
this muscle's going to get stronger.
Right.
The heart muscle doesn't work like that. It's just going to get more tired, basically, and more worn out.
Right.
And so,
Okay.
actually, the things that will help it is rest. Lots of sleep, resting. So, in that first year, I was sleeping a lot, an awful lot.
Right. Okay.
Sometimes 10, 15 hours a day. I have to get to try and help the muscle recover. And so, the drugs that I took then and today, their job is solely, beta blockers, things like that, is to relax the muscle and make it rest as much as it possibly can,
Okay.
which becomes a limiting factor in itself, because that means you're almost like putting like a speed limit on a car. Now this car can only do 40 miles an hour, right? Because you want to rest the
Yeah.
engine, right?
Yeah.
So, but that's helping it keep going in the long term. So it's about
Right.
playing. Yeah, okay, your peak performance is much lower now, but it'll run for a lot longer.
Okay.
So the
Yeah.
goal is to try and manage it for as long as possible, because the only other option, the only real option for this condition probably is a heart transplant, but that's like the
Right.
nuclear route, right? You
Yeah.
go there when there's nowhere else left to go, and you're literally
Yeah.
done. And actually, there's an interesting statistic about that, is that I looked into this a few years ago. I mean, it might have changed slightly now, but there's about 3,000 heart transplants a year globally, so it's not that common.
Yeah. Right.
And so it's quite an extreme procedure, and to find somebody with the right heart at the right time is,
Yeah.
if you've got the condition, that's not something you're banking on.
Right. Yeah.
I don't see that in my future particularly.
Right.
It's about managing the heart that I've got, and then trying to do the best for it. And so over time, the ejection fraction for me went from 25%. I got it up to about 45, was probably 50
Okay.
was probably the peak, in terms of recovery, and that was through a combination of just like, yeah, lifestyle, taking it easy to some degree, and rest. I mean, look, you've got to have some level of exercise, because you can't become completely unfit either,
Yeah.
because that
Yeah.
can be negative. But it's fine. But what you're not going to start do is work and say, "Oh, I'll start a couch to 5K or something." You're not going
Yeah.
to do that.
I can
It's
run a marathon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's about sort of just finding that kind of sensible level, walking, things like that. So, but
Right.
and I walk the dog every morning for a few kilometers, these days, and I'll try and go out on an
And
electric
it's quite
bike.
hilly here as well, so
It's
that's
quite hilly here.
probably,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
you're
And
getting a
I
bit
go
of
on the electric bike and I do a bit of paddleboarding. They are all fairly low impact, and
yeah.
they don't require you to have a high heart rate. But things like running and stuff, I've had to,
Yeah, can't do. So at the time, so you were married at the time. Did you have any kids or anything in the
yeah,
picture?
two daughters. Yeah,
Okay, so you had
yeah.
kids. So how does that change how you feel about your family and how you live your life, like within yourself? Like, because obviously you've had this incident that's happened, and now you've got this diagnosis, and you're like, okay, and basically you've got 5 years is pretty much what they've told you
Yeah,
at the time,
that's
right?
what I'm thinking. Yeah,
So
so
you're they've almost given you like a terminal diagnosis. How do you square that? What does that do to you?
I mean, to be honest, like a large part of me just kind of buried my head in the sand about it and kind of thought, well, everyone's going to die from something, right? And you know, I sort of went down the route, very British route, of kind of like stiff upper lip, and you could get hit by a bus tomorrow anyway, and you know, lots of people probably have things wrong with them, but they just don't know, and then it happens, and at
Yeah,
least I know what the thing is, and in a way, there's almost a sort of weird comfort in knowing what the thing that's probably going to kill you is, and and then you're sort of aware and ready for it, but it certainly did change my outlook, and quite soon after that, a lot of life changes happened, I think, for me, and your priorities shift, and you start to think about what you really want to get out of life and where you want to be and what you want to be doing, and because you think, well, you don't know how long you've got, and it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years. I was quite encouraged early on, I would say in year one, when I used to go and see the cardiac nurse at the hospital in High Wycombe, and he would say things to me like, well, actually, compared to other patients, you're doing really well. And, he said, if all my patients were as good as you, because I used to
right.
smoke and drink at that point, right?
Yeah,
Obviously, when this happened, the heart guy came into the ward and sort of said to me, right, do you smoke? And I was like, yes. He said, well, you need to never do that again.
yeah,
And do you drink? And I was like, well, I enjoy a pint of Guinness. He said,
yeah.
yeah, you need to never do that
Right.
either, right?
Okay.
Both things that are very bad for this condition. And so when I used to go and see the cardiac guy, and he would say, yeah, it's great, you've lost weight, you don't smoke, you don't drink, because I did just stop, by the way,
Yeah.
both things straight out of the gate. And it's surprising how motivated you are. I tried to give up smoking for years, right?
Yeah.
Years. It's just failure after failure.
Yeah.
Someone says, that's it, you're going to, okay, I'll stop. Um, and it wasn't difficult, which was the weird thing.
Caffeine?
So that's been the one vice that I've kind of clung on to,
Right.
and almost, I suppose, I do drink decaf, I would add, mostly. And I try to, limit that to some extent. But I think you kind of have to have something as well, So that's
Yeah.
that's. And they probably did tell me back then not to drink coffee, and I think I
Yeah.
probably ignored that one. But he would say to me, look, you're doing really well, you're doing all the right things. So in my mind, I was already kind of thinking, yeah, 5 years, but I can beat that,
Yeah.
right? Because if that's the average, right? That's accounting for all the people who just carry on smoking and drinking, right?
Yeah.
Don't change their
Exactly. Yeah.
ways.
And the
So
people who make it 6 months.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I'm
Same.
thinking. So I'm thinking. Well, I think I can beat this. I think I can. It's probably at that point I'm thinking. You know, because I was coming up. I was 37, so not far from 40. I think mentally I was thinking if I can get to 50, and then
Okay.
at that age my daughters would be a certain age, and I would have seen them grow up, and I think that was probably my goal actually at
Okay.
that point. No, I've set my targets higher now because I'm 56,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
at that stage, I think that's
Okay.
probably was the target, yeah, and to try and do everything to make that happen.
Did you make a bucket list?
Um, not in the sense of here's a list of things I want to go and do, but I definitely went through a process of deciding what's important and what's not. I mean, when I was laying in the hospital that first night, thinking this is probably it, and genuinely thinking like, this, yeah, this is not good and probably the end. Um, I do remember sort of thinking, I'd wish I'd spent more time with friends and family and less time worrying about work. And so I think it just, rather than a bucket list, I think I realigned my priorities.
Yeah.
I wanted to surf more. Things that I'd been sort of dreaming about doing, living up in Buckinghamshire, but never quite getting to do. Those sort of things. I mean, I live by the sea now, so I can surf and
Yeah.
do stuff, right, and
Yeah.
be out on the beach. And I just love being by the ocean. I always have done. And but somehow I found myself landlocked. And so I think rather than a bucket list, I started making a list of changes I needed to make in my
Good.
life for the next however many years.
Right. Okay. So you've made some changes.
Mhm.
You're ticking along. You're feeling better. Life's going along, and then you have another incident. What happens there?
Yeah, funny enough, the second incident is probably the least dramatic of the three. I think the last one, which we'll talk about
Yeah,
at the
we'll talk
end,
about that in a minute.
was probably more dramatic than the second one. The second one was quite incremental, and I saw it coming.
Okay.
You know, And it was at a point where I was very busy with work. I knew I was stressed. I knew I was working too hard. I knew I was getting tired. I knew I wasn't sleeping enough. I was on the road a lot with my job. I was, pulling into services, eating a lot of junk food. I kind of knew what was happening for a while and that things were degrading. And then
Right.
there is a tipping point when you get, but even then it was kind of like on that day, it wasn't like the first time where I've got to get to hospital. I'm going to be dead in an hour if I don't. This was
Right.
much more, I know things are getting serious. I can feel things aren't working properly. I need to get myself up to A&E, and it was much more kind of calm and planned. And you go up and
Okay.
you go and have a scan, and they go, yeah, your ejection fraction is way down now. We can see that your heart's failing again, but it was much more controlled. And also at that stage, because I'm on drugs for it as well. There are
Right.
the drugs. Some of the drugs I'm on, you know, try and stop it from going into complete
Meltdown.
mayhem,
Yeah.
meltdown like the first time. And I don't think anyone would ever be as spectacular as the first time because, of course, there's no support there for it at that point, and
Right.
it's just running like a train out of control, basically towards a cliff edge.
Do you know the Do you know what the percent is of people that make it past the first one?
Um, I think it's probably 50-50.
Right.
Yeah, and I
Okay.
think I think as the doctor did one, or not the doctor, the cardiac guy in High Wycombe did once say to me, not many people make it past the third, sort of
Right.
incident. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like, I'll
Yeah.
bear that in mind.
Thanks.
Um, but I do remember thinking at the time, but if the third was every sort of 5 or 10 years, that could be like 30 years maybe.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, this is it's the same thing you see in the media quite often. Footballers drop dead or something, or that
Yeah.
someone just you wouldn't necessarily. A lot of people who have this just think that they're overweight, or they've smoked too much, or they drunk too much, or it's just
Yeah.
they think they correlate it to not being fit. Look, a friend of mine who I knew for years didn't know he had this condition. A guy called Dave, and he was cycling with another friend of mine, James. They both live in Bristol, where we grew up. And this happened about 2 years ago, and they were on the Bath to Bristol cycleway. And Dave pulls over and says, my feet are really hurting me," and leans down to try and sort out his shoelaces, keels over, and just dies there and then on the track. And of course,
Wow.
the autopsy, it's dilated cardiomyopathy.
Right.
So he'd been living with it all his life, and presumably he'd been feeling tired and short of breath and all of those things, but it was undiagnosed because he just
Yeah.
put it down to lifestyle and being tired and overworked, not getting
Right.
enough sleep, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think, and maybe when this happened the second time, that was the trap that I was falling
Right.
into. Is just kind of like, well, but it'll be all right. I just, I'll get some rest next week, or there'll always
Right.
be, I'll eat healthy next week,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'd put on weight at that point, and I started to do all the things that you shouldn't do
Right.
because this is quite a number of years later, right? And you're
Yeah.
starting to feel maybe a bit more relaxed about things, or less, yeah, maybe the fear of it's faded slightly,
Yeah.
and so it happens again, and and that's a big wake up call then, because then you kind of go, okay, actually, no, that thing's still really real, and
Yeah.
I need to treat this with a
Yeah.
lot
Yeah.
more respect than I have been.
So for the second time, you were able to recognize because
Yeah,
you knew what it felt like.
yeah, I knew it was
So you,
coming,
yeah.
and I think I probably could have said, I can see this happening in the next couple of weeks. And so I think being able to identify it a little bit earlier and get to the hospital,
Mm.
it wasn't as critical,
Right.
So I'm in there, and at that point, my ejection fraction has dropped from, where it was at probably 45, 50, it's down to like 30. So it's not down to sort of 15 or 20, which is the
Yeah.
real red zone. So I think I've managed to kind of intersect it early, basically, and say, okay, well, actually, and they were able to then change medication, do some things, and of course, I took action because I was able to recognize it and actually get some rest. And I came off work for
Yeah.
a couple of months, and just took it easy.
Did you tell? What were you doing for a job at the time?
Yeah, I was working at the IMA. So I was at the IMA so long. It was all of these incidents where I was an employee of IMA. So and
And that is for people who don't know what that is.
institutional mechanical engineers.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were very
Okay.
good, very very supportive always around
Okay.
this stuff. I mean, I'd given them good service as well, I suppose. So, and they knew that the moment I was able to be back and able to function, I would be. And I was in a way never off that long with it
Yeah.
because of the nature of the work that I had. I was able to do a lot of stuff, remotely and telephone and online. So
Right.
quite quickly, I was able to be doing that
So
sort of
how
stuff.
many
So,
year how long is this after the first? So the first was 2007. So when
yeah,
is the second one?
I was about 10 years afterwards. Yeah, so
Oh, right. Okay. So yeah.
yeah,
So yeah,
so,
you
so,
had
so
had a long time to
yeah, and
kind of
we
relax
we were
and
living in Swansea at the time, and
right.
I moved down here. I married my new wife Emily, and it was living in a new world.
Okay. Yeah.
Lots have changed in that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Other than my job.
Yeah. Okay.
Although
Yeah.
that had changed because the role I was in, the first time in the role I'm in at that point, and then the last time were different roles as well. So
So did it? I'm curious because, and we'll maybe talk about this in a minute. But does it help to be able to walk into a hospital and say, "I have X," and I can feel it coming on, and they actually pay attention to you and treat it a bit more seriously than if you just wandered in off the street and said,
yeah,
"My heart's doing something weird and I don't know what's going on."
yeah, I think absolutely, and that was the problem with the first time when I used to go to the doctors and the GP, is had they done an echo probably at any
Yeah,
point, in the 6 months leading up to this, they would
yeah,
have kind of looked at it and gone, "Ooh, okay, that's not good." But
right.
they didn't because
Yeah,
they made assumptions that you're 37. We've done an ECG, which is ECG. It's just a photograph of a moment,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
it's not enough data, I don't think. And it sort of surprises me even now when I look back and I think, well, why didn't you do an echo? Because it's not an expensive. Every
yeah,
surgery is equipped with a echo, right?
yeah.
Pretty much. Or you can do these
Should
things
be able to do.
fairly
Yeah,
easily, right?
yeah,
So, but it does help, yeah. And I think, like, you rock up at A&E and explain what the condition is and say, I'm telling you there's a problem.
yeah.
And I've got the Apple Watch as well. I mean, in the most recent incident, I had the Apple Watch, and I could see instantly it wouldn't even record. My pulse was
Right.
so weak it couldn't pick anything
Couldn't
up.
pick it up.
Yeah, and
Right.
so that in itself is a pretty good
Right.
indicator that
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
something
yeah.
fundamentally very wrong.
Wrong.
You know,
Yeah.
but
So when it happened the second time, did you so you were in hospital, did you have another heart attack while you were in
no.
hospital, or were they able to
So the second time
sort of
they were able
mitigate it?
to sort of intersect it and get things under control
Okay.
much quicker and deal with it before
Right.
the train runs out of out of control, as it were. So
Okay.
so that was more straightforward. In a way, just me. I don't know. Was it as frightening? Not certainly not as frightening as the first time.
Yeah.
Um,
But surely
sort of,
it
yeah.
focused your attention again.
It worried me more in one respect, in terms of, well, maybe more than even the last time in some respects, just because it was a sort of wake up where you kind of went, you know what, maybe this is the beginning of, because what at some point the heart will degrade, right? The chances of me making it to 90 are
Yeah.
almost zero. I would, it's I've already got a 90-year-old's heart, right? So at some point, um, there will be this moment where it starts to decline. And whatever drugs I take and whatever I do, it's just getting weaker and weaker, right?
Yeah.
And so I suppose for me at that point, it was kind of like there was a moment where, so you're thinking, so is this the beginning of that? Is this now the beginning of that steady decline that's unstoppable? Or is it lifestyle? Will changing my lifestyle be enough to get me back to where I was previously?
Right.
And as it turned out, it was, and by changing my lifestyle, I was able to get an improvement. And again, but a new drug had come along, and it was interesting because that
Right.
moment also was the trigger for them to say, why don't we start you on this drug? We've seen really good outcomes with this one."
Okay.
So they switched me to that. So I think the changing of the drug at that point, and then sorting out the kind of the food, the junk food, the sleep, all that sort of stuff, and I could then within 6 months see it recovered by 5 or 10%. You know,
Okay.
which then you kind of go, okay, yeah. So it's not the beginning of the end, kind of thing. So that cheered me up, and then I was fine then until
The next time.
the next time, which is yeah.
So how I'm curious to understand, and if you can try and go back to that point, how does it, like, obviously it happens the first time and you're like, oh shit, this has happened, and it makes you reevaluate and you reprioritize. Then it happens again. Do you go through that process again? Do you then start going, I need to reprioritize again, or do you kind of go, Is it just more of the same?
Not to the same, some, but not to the same extent. Because I suppose the first time after that, I sort of made a lot of life changes. In fact, I'm living in Swansea and
Yeah.
have a new wife and all that.
Yeah.
So a lot of changes had happened, I suppose, in my life, and I was sort of happy with what I wanted, where I was, what I was doing. So this time it was much more just about lifestyle. Just I need to
Okay.
stop eating so much, stop drinking so much coffee, and
Yeah.
get more sleep, and just you know try and be a bit more regulated in how I look after myself. So
Okay.
rather than I need to change my life, and maybe there was a point as well there where I thought, yeah, maybe I need to not worry about work too much again. Maybe I'd allowed
Yeah.
myself to start working too hard or worrying about work or putting myself under too much pressure. And I think that was a moment probably where I thought, actually, yeah, no, work is definitely cannot be the priority over my health. So
Yeah.
that needs to come
Yeah.
first and then work. So
And did you have better support at home after this
yeah,
than the?
well, I think to be in fairness, since I met Emily, which was in 2009, um, she's always been incredibly supportive about this all the way through. Anyway, so I don't
Yeah.
think that support has changed at all throughout. It's always been constant. And
Okay.
that's I know that when I'm struggling, I've got a problem. She gets it completely. She fully. One of
Yeah.
the things that Emily had gone through her own sort of turmoils and problems, and um, around the same time I was having heart failure, and one of the things that really sort of brought us together was the fact we sort of had this sort of shared experience of life changing moments, shall we say?
Yeah.
You know, so
You
she
sort
gets
of
it.
trauma bonded, but from different
Yeah, yeah,
incidents,
yeah.
which
So
is
she so she
interesting.
completely
Yeah.
gets it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then, so lifestyle changes again. You're sort of getting back to normal. Everything's getting a little bit more comfortable again. You've gone another, what, 8 years, I guess, 9 years, 8 years
Yeah,
at that point, because that was 2017.
yeah,
And then you end up, what, late last year?
yeah, yeah. This was really
So,
self-inflicted. This one,
so
like
what happened this time?
Well, again, like time passes and you get confident, right?
Mm,
You start to think, I can do this, I can do that. I don't know. In that time in between, right, I'd done some really silly things in hindsight. I did a
right.
10K across, the Gower and Langennith, right, which
Okay.
made me feel really unwell and dizzy and really
Yeah,
quite
funny that.
poorly. Yeah, funny that. Yeah, yeah. But
At some point along the way, did you say, maybe I shouldn't be doing
yeah,
this?
I kind of always knew, but like, I don't know. There's something. I mean, I was a competitive swimmer growing up, so I suppose
Yeah.
there's just this sort of natural competitiveness within me somewhere. But actually, the last incident has killed that. I understand now that, like, so
Yeah.
in the case of the last incident, I decided, probably about 2 months before, that it would be a good idea to join a gym. And but I told myself, it'll be fine because I'm just going to go there and I'm just going to just do some walking and stuff on the machines, and I'll do some very light weights, and I'll go and float about in the pool, and it'll be very low key. I'm not going to do anything that's going to. But of course, over the weeks as I was going, just run a little bit, and I'd just been building up,
Right.
basically just a little bit heavier on the weights, just competing with myself. But I
Mm.
mean, compared to what anyone else would be doing at a gym, right? It's nothing, right? What I'm talking about. It's a
Yeah.
For most people, most gym goers, this would be considered, like a warm up or a very light workout. But for me, it was way, way
Yeah.
beyond what I should have been doing.
Right.
And I just obviously been pushing myself too hard in that sense, um, to a point at which, yeah, my heart wasn't having it. So on this particular morning, it was quite early. I went up. It's probably about 7:30, 6 o'clock. Again, probably not a good time to exercise when you've got a heart condition
Yeah.
very early, because your whole body's still
Straight out of bed.
wake
Yeah.
up, yeah, with no food, and
Yeah.
I've put myself on the running machine, and the telly's on above the running machine, and I'm chugging along to something. This is great, going great guns, and then I jump on the weights, and I thought, do you know what, I'll just go up an extra level this time. I'll go from 30 to 40 kilos, and
Yeah.
I'm going to do an extra set, and about halfway through the weights, I started to feel really sick, like I was going to throw up,
Right.
but like really nauseous, and I thought, well, that's weird, like that's not
Yeah.
right.
That's not right.
I need to get out of here. So I didn't want to be sick in the gym, over the equipment and stuff. So I sort of got up and walked back into the change rooms very early morning. So there's no one around, and I go into the change room, and it's really just me in there. And I sort of sat down on the bench for a bit, And I was half thinking, should I just go and float in the pool? Maybe I'll feel better in a minute. I thought, I know I really feel like I'm going to vomit in a minute, so I'm going to have to. I can't go near a pool. That would be horrendous. So I sat there and literally just in my pants and a t-shirt, and I started feeling quite sweaty and hot. So I took the t-shirt off, trying to cool down, and then it was a bit like just the lights were dimming and the walls were just closing in. I mean, like tunnel vision was happening. And I thought, Jesus, this is not good. And I think I tried to lie down on the bench, and that's it. I can't. After that, it's like
Yeah.
I don't know. So the next thing I know is I'm waking up on the floor, and the gym owner, thankfully, he's walked in at some point and found me
Right.
on the floor, and sort of obviously panicked a bit, presumably, and
Yeah.
you know, sort of got anyway. But at that point, I'm sort of starting to come around a little bit, and he's like, trying to talk to me, and I'm like, do you know where you are? And I'm like, oh, like, gym,
Yeah.
I think, or something. And he's trying to get a pulse, and there's no, he
And
can't
you
get a
can.
pulse, and it's
Yeah.
just like, we'll do your blood pressure, and it's nothing, and it's just kind of like my blood pressure was terrible. The thing couldn't even pick it up. Um, so at that point, so I'm sort of sitting there, and of course his reaction at that point is, you know, do we need to call an ambulance? And I said, well, I know what's happening, and the fact that I'm talking to you means we're possibly okay because I do understand what's happening. Because if it was going to just go, it would have gone.
Yeah.
The fact that I'm now having a conversation with you. So I sat with him for about an hour, probably. Meanwhile, I've messaged Emily, you know,
Yeah.
and I thought I'm going to get to a hospital quicker if she just picks me up and we drive straight out there than waiting for an ambulance to rock
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
So she's arrived, and then he's helped me out into the car. And obviously, at that point, Emily's got me up to the hospital,
Yeah.
and then the hospital sort of takes over. But the main thing I remember thinking as I went down was like, thank God I've got my pants on. Really,
I remember
it's
you
just like,
saying that. Yeah.
it's
I
just,
just remember you saying that, and I was like,
yeah, it's
what
just,
what a random thing. But again, that was quite interesting for me because now this is like the third time, and at some point you must have in your brain gone, "Oh shit, I know what's happening," and and that's your thought. It's like
yeah.
you've just kind of got to the point where you're like, "Well, this is the third time this has
Well, I
happened," and
honestly thought this time was it. I have to say, of the three events,
mm,
right? So the first time, you don't know what's happening, but you know something serious, but you don't know, so you don't know.
yeah,
Second time, it feels like a sort of slow car crash, but actually, I know even though I'm going into this car crash, things are probably going to be okay. This time was just kind of like I was really annoyed with myself as I sat there. As the thing started to black out, I sat there. I was furious with myself. I was just like,
mm,
"You're an idiot! Like, why? Why? You've put yourself in this position. It's your fault, and this is how it's going to end. You're going to be sat like a sad man in your pants in a gym on your own, and
yeah,
that's this is how it ends." Like, and I was just like, actually just livid with myself, just like this cannot be how it ends, surely.
uh,
But genuinely, that time I did think that this is, this because the others as well, in a way, hadn't been as dramatic in terms of just everything shutting down, and just, it was almost like someone was turning the lights out, and I
right.
thought, like, oh god, yeah, no, this is
Did
like,
you have like did you see anything, or did it literally just go
it
black?
just felt like I was going into a tunnel. And there was a moment though where I thought about this a lot since, actually. There's a moment where I've drifted off mentally somewhere else, and I'm in some kind of happy place.
Right.
I'm not in the gym anymore. I'm not in that
Yeah.
change room, and I don't know where I am. And it's like a dream or something. I'm just somewhere, and
Right.
I'm thinking about something completely unrelated, nothing to do with the situation that I'm in.
Yeah.
And then I'm waking up. And
Right.
so it's sort of, so I've drifted
Okay.
somewhere completely, but
Did that happen the first time, or did you
no,
just
that's the interesting thing.
okay?
This was the time that, for some reason, it was like, and it was almost like my brain wanted to think about something other than what the current situation was. It was like it was trying to sort
Yeah.
of, my brain kind of went, right, don't think about what's happening because that's awful,
Yep.
and we're now going to think about something, jolly and silly and whatever.
Yeah.
But I can't tell you what that was. But I know, I remember that feeling of,
Mm.
and then it's just, yeah. I genuinely thought, to be honest, that was curtains.
That was it.
I really did. I thought, and I
Yeah.
was just so sad and so annoyed with myself, but just desperately sad. Just sitting there thinking, I got
Mm.
Albert here and the girls and Emily, and just thinking like, like, that can't be the way, surely. But
No.
mainly as well because I knew that it was my own stupidity that had got me into that position.
Yeah.
You know, overestimating my physical capability had put me in that position basically, and it's not a mistake I would make now. Again, I think that did teach me something actually.
Interesting. Yeah. It's I mean, frankly, it scares the shit out of me because I've had very similar symptoms myself, and I've even been to hospital a couple of times from it happening, and they basically just don't pay any attention to me either. I
Yeah.
mean, I went home and did a 24-hour thing and whatever once, and of course, it's not doing it then, and so there's nothing happening, and
You-
so they're just like, yeah, but you're fine, and I'm like, yeah, but I wasn't when I came in,
no, no.
and I know,
Well,
that there's something going on,
like you,
but
I'd had before the first time the 24-hour things, the ECGs. None of it ever showed it. I
yeah,
would say to anyone, and as you said earlier to the camera, we're not medical people, but I would say to anyone, if you're concerned, demand an echo.
yeah,
Tell them they physically need to look at your heart. It's
yeah,
not enough just to,
yeah,
monitor
yeah.
some electrical signals coming off it. They physically, because the moment they looked at mine, they kind of went, "Well, that's twice the size it should be." So
Yeah.
you know, and that's
And was that in the hospital or was that at a doctor's
that
office?
was the first time in the
In
hospital.
hospital, okay.
And it's kind of like, and they did say to me in the hospital, "Well, where have you been?" Like, and I said, "Well, I've been to the doctors many times." And in fact, when I went back to the doctor after the first time, and sort of rocked up back at the surgery, it was a sort of follow up about a month afterwards. And he sort of was looking at my records, obviously before I came in, and as I walked in, he went, "Well, this is a turn up, isn't it?" And I just kind of went, "Is it?" Because it
Yeah,
doesn't feel like it to me. I feel like we knew about this, but you know,
yeah. I
um,
might have been in a few times. Somebody, I think it was on social media, so you can take it for what you will, but somebody said when they go to their doctor and every time their doctor says, "Oh, no, we're not gonna do any tests," they say, "I want you to specifically write in the notes, 'I chose not to do any tests.'"
yeah, okay,
Because then, all of a sudden, they say, "Actually, maybe we will do."
yeah,
Because they don't wanna write that they made the conscious choice not to do any tests,
yeah.
so I don't
That's
know if it
interesting.
works or not, but I'm gonna
Well,
try it the next time I go
I
in.
mean, I don't want to get into knocking the doctors because they do a very
No, no,
tough
no,
job.
but
But I would just say to anyone that fight your own corner, and if you feel that there's a problem, um, an echo isn't an expensive procedure
no,
particularly, so it can
no.
be done, and they can learn a lot from it. So
So what was your learning from the last time? Is there I
yeah,
mean, other than being annoyed with yourself and actually going, "Okay, I've brought this on myself," is there is there any additional wisdom that you take from this every time it happens, or
yeah, I think it's know my limits. And interestingly, about 2 months before that happened. I played squash one evening with a friend of mine, Eugene, who's hyper competitive about things generally, and squash particularly. Um, and we went with my nephew, who was living with us at the time, and we played squash. And I watched them both play, and the nephew's very fit and strong, and they had a really good game. And then I sort of went, "Oh, I'll have a go with you." And of course, got carried away, and within sort of 15 minutes, had to sit down on the side of the court and
yeah,
felt genuinely unwell the next day,
right,
and not to the extent that I did on that occasion, but was clearly not good the next day.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and what it's taught me is that this time is just know your limits, like, and I've drawn that line mentally.
mm,
Now it's walks are fine, going on a bike with it's electric, on flat is fine.
yeah,
So I did a cycle ride actually recently with some friends, and it was along a canal towpath because we knew it would be flat, and it
yeah,
was on an electric bike.
okay, yeah,
So it's
yeah,
just
yeah,
it's rearrange things. Still, I don't want to stop living and doing stuff,
yeah,
and and sitting in front of a computer and working is fine. That's not messing with my heart,
yeah.
but putting physical strain onto it.
Do you still surf? Can you surf?
No, because the ability to sort of paddle out praying with your arms that's
Yeah,
hard work.
yeah,
What I will do when the weather's nice on a good day and the waves aren't too big is I go out and stand at paddleboard, because actually with a paddle you can kind of get out with not too much effort,
yeah,
and then catching a wave is a few quick paddles and then the wave's doing the work. So actually I can still do that fairly well,
okay.
but I wouldn't go out and pray and surf. No,
Not
that's
proper surfing.
no shame, but it is what it
Yeah,
is. So,
yeah, yeah,
but again, I can still scratch the itch by going on a paddleboard. So,
yeah,
so,
okay. Brilliant.
yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're still here.
Well, and yeah, exactly. And we can do fun things like make podcasts, and
We can
it's
do.
yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, any wisdom for anyone else other than your advice that you've had so far?
I think that the great takeaways for me are, realize that, there's a time limit, I think, on everything, and you never know, right? And that for me is quite a big wake up call, that you haven't nothing is forever, and things will change at some point. And it's this idea, this central idea, that it's the things that hit you from the side that you don't see coming, that that are going to kind of knock you out, and then you have to work out how you go forward from those. The things that you can always see in front of you, that you can plan for, or 6 months time, this is going to be really busy, or we're going to have this problem, we're going to have this to do. Those are things you can sort of always manage, and they don't. In the end, they're never as bad as you think they're going to be. But the things that just hit you from the side, so it's just learning to be resilient to those, and kind of go, accept it. Oh, that's happened. That happened. Is out of my control. But now we're just going to kind of see where we go from here. And I sort of, probably the thing I learned was that you can't always decide when the chapter ends, but you can write the next chapter. You know what I mean? And that might be a very different book or a very different story,
Yeah.
but you do get to choose that as well. So, and the things that came out of it for me, when I think back in those early days, was I'd always been really interested in music and listened to music. I had a huge collection of albums and things, but I'd never really produced or made music. And when I found myself almost unable to walk up the stairs, I could sit with my laptop and make music, right? And so I
Right.
started making music, and I've produced 3 albums since then. I've written books since. There's things that I probably never would have done or thought of doing that I started to do because of the change of situation or circumstances.
Right.
My interest in subjects like AI and other things got much deeper because, well, I can't spend my days mountain biking and surfing, so I'm going to do more reading and learning about this or that. So just embrace the new world when these things do hit you from the side, and just go with it, because it was kind of, that's your journey. And I think it's a weird thing to say, but the heart failure in its totality has not been a negative thing in my life,
Right.
really, because it's given me the life that I've had, and I wouldn't change any of it. I wouldn't be here with Emily and Albert without heart failure, probably. So,
That's a good positive note. Let's leave
Yeah.
it there.
yeah.
Alan, thanks very much.
Pleasure. Nice to be here.
Cheers.